Greetings, brethren, and welcome to our presentation today, a UPA7.org production, where we will address the subject of the symbolic codes being hijacked and examine the train of errors that follow. So what are we looking at here? We're going to address the questions of who started the trend to use the symbolic codes to introduce heretical doctrines. We're going to look at the history of this. And then ask the question, are there others who have fallen into this dreadful trap that are copying this example? Unfortunately, that's the case. And then what's the latest incarnation of a counterfeit symbolic code that has arisen recently in our midst? And then address the resolution of what is the only safe recourse for 100% rod-only Davidians that claim to follow the shepherd's rod. What should we do about this? So we'll begin with this text for meditation, and I'll read this passage. It comes from Symbolic Code, Volume 2, numbers 3 and 4, page 2, and this is published in 1936. It reads, this is the introductory paragraph introducing the series. This little paper is dedicated for the conveyance of news items and reformatory activities to present truth believers, to answer questions in connection with the sealing message of the 144,000 and the great multitude, on the prophecies of Isaiah, Zechariah, Zephaniah, Micah, Hosea, Joel, Daniel, the Revelation, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, etc., but more fully on the first 8 books above mentioned, on Christ's parables, on types and symbols, and also on the writings of Mrs. E.G. White. However, this monthly visitor promises to answer questions on such passages of Scripture only as have been divinely revealed and authoritatively proclaimed, bearing the positive mark of truth. Therefore, it will either give a correct answer to questions or else confess its ignorance by saying, I do not know. So we see here clearly stated the purpose of the symbolic code, which was to reveal reformatory activities for the advance of the shepherd's rod message, so give historical content, to answer questions regarding the message, the sealing message, and in particular on prophecies of 8 books of the Bible, which have a lot of prophetic information. And in so doing, it was clearly under divine revelation and proclaimed with divine authority, bearing the positive mark of truth. So clearly we consider the symbolic codes published by Brother Houteff to be part and parcel of the golden bowl, the inspired message of the shepherd's rod. This is without doubt. So take a moment, ponder this image, pray and meditate about what we're going to share with you, about what we should be studying and feasting on. From the golden bowl, we see here how we get the truth from the Bible, the 2 olive trees, the 2 pipes. The prophets bring the oil into the golden bowl, labeled the spirit of prophecy. And from there, the ministers go and take the oil out of the bowl and bring it to the church. So we really need to know what constitutes the spirit of prophecy. And that's very clear. If you don't know this, it's the writings of Ellen White and Victor Houteff, no more, no less. We're not told to read books or compilations after the death of these prophets. So it's very important when we look at the symbolic codes to keep this and bear this in mind. We want to teach and publish only that which was done under the direction of the prophet. The one shepherd, God's chosen shepherd, Brother Houteff. And this statement from Timely Greetings, Volume 2, Number 2, page 23. It reads, God does not forsake his flock. He tenderly calls them my flock, and he reassures them that he is their God. He will, without fail, set one shepherd to accomplish what a multitude of shepherds have failed to do. Now is your opportunity to feast on meat in due season at the hands of God's chosen shepherd. Well, brethren, if you don't know who that chosen shepherd is, you're going to be misled. And clearly in the context, the opportunity to feast on the Timely Greetings, which was published by this man, Victor Houteff, in 1946, was then, and it still applies now. So the idea that some other shepherd's going to come in later, like in our current day, is clearly an indication of a rank impostor, a counterfeit. So let's bear this in mind when we look at the symbolic codes. What's the original and what are the counterfeits that have arisen? So to know the truth, we want to know what the originals are. Davidians have sometimes called these the old symbolic codes. What we really mean is the symbolic codes that were published under the authority and direction of Brother Houteff while he was alive. And so let's look at some of those. It started with this. Volume 1, number 1, came out as a newsletter on 8.5 by 11 paper, and then later U.S. Legal, which is 8.5 by 14 inches. So this is Volume 1, number 1. And then later, starting with Volume 2, number 2, this is in 1936, it was reformatted into this professional magazine style layout with this marvelous, highly illustrative cover with a lot of symbolic meaning. And it continued on in this series. This is, like say, Volume 2, numbers 3 and 4, and it continued all the way up until Volume 6. And then starting with Volume 7, numbers 6 to 12, the cover artwork changed. Okay, and this is an illustration of that. And then it continued on in our next slide to up through Volume 9, numbers 11 to 12. It had this cover artwork. And then in 1943, the Symbolic Code stopped. And that made room for the introduction of the Timely Greetings series. And then in 1954, the Symbolic Code was resumed, starting with Volume 10, number 1, September 1954. And then in October, Volume 10, number 2. And these were the last symbolic codes published by Brother Houteff while he was alive. So Volume 10, numbers 1 and 2. So this is what we mean by the old symbolic codes, or the authorized codes, published under the direction of the prophet while he was alive. So that's important to define what we mean by symbolic codes, the original, the authorized versions. Now the question comes up, what about codes that were published later after Brother Houteff died, such as this sample, these bundles of codes that were published that are found in the James White Library, nice, neatly tied up bundles. We refer to these as the post-mortem codes. That is, after the death of Brother Houteff, and they were published under the authority of Florence Houteff from 1955 to 61. And this included Volume 10, number 1 and 2, which was the original. However, it's continued on with Volume 10, number 7, and then Volume 11, Volume 12, Volume 13, and Volume 14. So, to the people at Andrews University, they consider all of this the work of Victor Houteff. Unfortunately, it's not. In these codes are claimed sermon addresses that from Brother Houteff that are found in volumes number 10, or Volume 10, number 7, through Volume 13, numbers 11 and 12. The alleged new code sermon addresses, which, if you're not familiar with this, these alleged sermons contain a lot of problems, some errors, contradictions with the original Rod message. Now, we have a 2-part video series. This has been a long-standing controversy, but we've addressed this clearly. If you would like to, if you're not familiar with this, you can check the link in the description box below, where you can look at those studies where we address the 5 major contradictions between these alleged new code sermons and the original Rod message. So please check those out if you haven't already. The question that arises, though, when these codes come up is, well, why don't Davidians publish all of these codes? Okay, why do they only cherry pick certain ones? Why don't they publish, for example, Volume 11, numbers 1 and 5, or Volume 14? Well, the answer is clear. It's because they contain error. The error of Florence Houteff's 42 months time setting, where she predicted April of 1959 for the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. Well, we all know that came in pass, and that's clearly a false prophecy. So if these new codes contain false prophecies, why touch them at all? Yeah, how can we know they're reliable? So this presents a paradox or a dilemma, and the only safe and sane procedure is to avoid them altogether. So once again, here's another viewpoint of these bound up bundles in pristine condition that exist in Adventist libraries. So to Seventh-day Adventists, they think this is all, they attribute all this to the work of Victor Houteff, and it includes the problems of the time setting, and so they blame it on him, when it really was the work of the wife, Florence. So you see the problem here? And notice how clever of Counterfeit. The covers look the same as Volume 10, Number 1 and 2, which were part of the original rod. So we cannot judge by a cover, right? You have to go with the content inside. Tragically, these new codes, the post-mortem codes, continue to be republished by various groups over the years. For example, in Salem, when the Storehouse moved there from 1970 to 74, they republished the new code sermons in this version of the Symbolic Codes in a 5-volume set. Later, Mount Dale, when the Storehouse moved there in 1988 up to the present day, they republished them in a set of 4. This creates some confusion. We used to think these were part of the rod, but the question is, what is the format? Things change, okay? And we could never locate the original format other than those done by Florence Houteff. And then Salem, of course, publishes the infamous Blue Book, which includes the old codes and the new codes, and they published this from 1992 all the way up until the present day. So these things continue to be published, and they create a lot of controversy and confusion amongst Davidians. Now, we want to look at another trend about other symbolic codes that have been published, or unauthorized codes that have been resurrected. Now, here's a sample of a symbolic code that, at first glance on the cover, things look a little bit different. The cover artwork looks like it's the rod, but it's clearly not the same as an original. And notice the identification, Volume 1, Number 1, but the date, August-December 1961. This is not the same as Volume 1, Number 1, published by Victor Houteff. So what is this? Well, this code was reinstated to reorganize 100% rod-only Davidians against the false teachings of Florence Houteff and her unauthorized executive council. This is primarily the work of Brother Harry Warden and M.J. Bingham, who recognized the errors of Florence and called to reorganize the rod and get back to publishing the original. So they were following the idea from the Leviticus to organize a session. You had to announce it in 2 successive editions of the Symbolic Code. So that gave them impetus to resurrect the code to announce the call for the session. So what do we do with this thing? Well, this code does contain important historical facts. So it's not like we disregard it. It's just that it's not part of the inspired message. And the reason why is because it also contains false teachings on the Bashan pasture concept that were introduced by M.J. Bingham. So it's a mixture of truth and error. And this concept was introduced because the Davidians that reorganized against Florence were under the idea that they had to reestablish the publishing back in Waco, Texas. Well, that property had already been sold off and liquidated under the mandate of God, because Brother Houteff published it in 10 symbolic codes, sell off first a part, then the whole, right? And that was already accomplished. So in order to keep people from going back there, God allowed Bingham to introduce this error that, Carmel had withered, and it was time to go to Bashan. Well, the problem with that is Bingham did not distinguish, and they failed to distinguish the difference between Mount Carmel Center, which is a physical place, and Carmel Pasture, which is a period of spiritual truth. So they're 2 different things. And that's why a lot of Davidians are confused. If you're not familiar with that, we check the link in the description box below on a video we have that clearly distinguishes the difference between Carmel Pasture and Mount Carmel Center. 2 different things. So Davidians were duped at this time, but it at least prevented them from going back to Waco. And so they reorganized the publishing work in Southern California, where they were meeting, Vista, California. So that's part of the history series. We have a 6-part series on the history of the movement of Storehouse. If you're not familiar with that, covers all the details. So the codes were, like I say, resurrected, but not under the direct authority of God. They contained historical information, but they also contained doctrinal error. And the cover artwork is also an amalgamation of the cover artwork from earlier codes. It's mixed and matched. Lennox Sam makes a big deal out of this, claiming it's a Catholic Eucharist. We're not sure about this, but clearly the authority to redo the cover artwork was not directed by God. Now here's a symbolic code documenting the move of the publishing work from California eastward to Salem, South Carolina in 1970. So here's a code. The cover is authentic based on the original, but notice the number, volume 9, number 3, July, September 1970. Now, Brother Houteff published a volume 9, but that was back in 1943. This one is clearly an unauthorized reprint, and it documented the session in Salem, South Carolina. So this documents the rise of Salem Association from 1970 to 74. Okay, important historical information, and that is its value. However, it included this original artwork, so it looks like an original, but it's really not. It's unauthorized because of that. And so for that reason, we take it for historical information, not for doctrinal teaching. And this trend of resurrecting the code to start your own association is nothing new. Of course, when Calimesa, or Red Bluff, California, this was a group that broke away from Yucaipa in 1983, and its co-founders were Wanda Bloom and Erwin Reichman. And notice here, they start the symbolic code. It kind of looks like one of the originals, but the typology is different. And notice, volume 1, numbers 1 to 12, okay, date, September, December 1983. So you see the problem we have here? We have all these symbolic codes, volume 1, but different dates, different publishers, different authors. And that creates the confusion. And of course, Wanda's association in Red Bluff, California, continues to publish symbolic codes. This is the latest one we have, volume 24, and published 2006. And the issue in here is this breakaway from Yucaipa uses it to publish their ideas, or their private opinions. And so their codes introduce a number of heterodox doctrines. So the content is clearly not authorized or according to what's in the Golden Bowl. So this is the thing. People use the codes, they hijack it to advance and claim that they're the place. They're the original, but they're not. So we see a trend here. And not to be outdone, every association does this. Here's, for example, Mountaindale, who broke away from Salem and reorganized in the 1980s, 1986, and then joined with Yucaipa in 1986 and began to publish original rod, but they also resurrected the code. And here's some examples. Clearly here you see the cover artwork, nothing like the original, but it is called the Symbolic Code. And once again, it does include historical information, parts of their goings-on, what they do in their group. However, it also is an avenue to introduce error. For example, this Symbolic Code Spring 2012, See Not a Confederacy, if you open the cover, it's nothing but verbatim quote teaching out of the new codes from Florence Houteff, 12 Symbolic Code in particular. So once again, it mixes truth with error and creates confusion. And then we come to Waco, who broke from Mountaindale in 1991 under the direction of Norman Archer, and they have their symbolic codes, these amalgamations and abominations that are the work of the foot of Norman Archer. So they have one, for example, when they have General Conference Sessions, 2005, for example, St. Louis, they label this Symbolic Code to Laodicea, Volume 14, numbers 4 through 8, 2005. So once again, you get overlapping, competing codes. The cover artwork, the content, like I say, it's just the work of a foot. an amalgamation, a counterfeit. And here's one of their later ones, General Conference Session 2010 in Atlanta, Georgia, Symbolic Code, Volume 11, 2010. And once again, it contains, Waco follows the new codes like Florence, so it contains, they will bow down and worship at her altar. So it contains erroneous teaching on the Assyrian Confederacy and Jonah's phase of the message and so forth and so on. So once again, we see the code being hijacked and used to publish the agenda of whatever association. Wanda, Bloom, Mountaindale, Waco, Salem, and you get the picture here. A lot of confusion. Well, not to be outdone, here's the latest reiteration coming from Linux Sam, which is rather ironic because he's the one that makes the big noise about the errors in the new codes and uses that as a wedge to attack Waco and Mountaindale. But he himself now, just recently, has resurrected the code. And here we have volume 2021. That's interesting. January to March 2021. So this is a brand new revelation. Now we got this thing, we got the cover work. It kind of looks like the original, but clearly colorized. Who gave them authority to do that? God certainly didn't. So they colorized the cover, they changed the dates, and then the question becomes, what's inside this thing? You know, is it representing the original shepherd's rod? And the answer is no. It's a deadly, poisonous counterfeit. Just open the cover and you got a letter from the editor. Of course, the editor is Linux Sam because the copyright page identifies it. But he goes blah, 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 and then he leaves with the address, his email, and the P.O. box, Waco, Texas. Okay, they're Waco worshipers. Okay, they worship a piece of ground. And he signs it off, David Elijah Jezreel. Whoa, did you catch that? He thinks he's antitypical King David, antitypical Elijah, and antitypical Jezreel. And you're like, wait a minute. I thought that was Brother Houteff. And it is. So who's this guy? I mean, he's a rank imposter. I mean, it's blatant. It's like no more secret. It's published in writing. If you go further in here, you got this advertisement for their version of the School of Prophets, okay, hosted by, of course, Linux Sam, God's ordained minister. No, he's not. He's a self-appointed minister. God didn't ordain him. The devil did. So they start with this series of prophets. You know, you start with Moses, Samuel, Christ, William Miller, Ellen White, Victor Houteff. Okay, those were a series of prophetic messengers. We accept that. But then it doesn't stop there. It goes to the last one, antitypical Elijah, that last circle there. And then inside of it's a quote, you alone, in the closet of prayer and with the aid of the Spirit, can determine whether the Elijah has come or whether he is yet to come. General Conference Special, page 8, paragraph 2. Oh, so there's another Elijah after Brother Houteff? Well, that's what he believes. That's what his people believe. Brethren, this is not... Who wrote General Conference Special? It wasn't Linux Sam. It was Victor Houteff. He's the antitypical Elijah. So we got this blatant counterfeit, a rank imposter stepping up to the prophetic office of Brother Houteff, kicking him out and putting himself in his place. I mean, this couldn't be any more plain or simple. So clearly, once again, symbolic codes hijacked to introduce a false prophet and all his associated false teachings. Of course, how they hypnotize their brainwashed minions is hosting webinars and Zoom meetings many times a week for different parts in Africa and different parts of the world. And you listen to this guy drone on and on for hours and hours and hours. This is not how you study the Bible, brethren. You get the printed versions, the original, and study them for yourself. But you let this man hypnotize you and brainwash you, and you attend his meetings, you're going to be lost in the lake of fire. It's deadly error. And everything he touches is contaminated. He has these counterfeit publications. He compiles the rod. He stole it from Don Adair, republishes it, these compiled volumes, sells them. Does not publish the original. None of them do. Okay, except UP7.org. We publish the original. But these people compile it, sell it, and call it the rod. And you see why we have a lot of confusion, okay? This is a counterfeit compilation, unauthorized, done by Lennox Sam. And of course, he does the electronic versions on Amazon. And he steals artwork. For example, that cover artwork from Shepherd's Rod Volume 1 was done by up7.org and Adobe Illustrator. So Lennox Sam has no problem stealing the work of others, cover artwork, whatever, and content, and then repackaging electronic form and then selling it for a cost. So you can see this guy's just a blatant fraud, unauthorized rank imposter. Sad story. And people fall for it. So we have, brethren, a clear Bible warning. I guess the people don't believe their Bibles or read them. Revelation 22, verses 18-19. For I testify unto every man that heareth the words of the prophecy of this book, if any man shall add unto these things, God shall add unto him the plagues that are written in this book. Lennox Sam, Donna Dare, Mount Dale, Norman Archer in Waco, Wanda Bloom. Are you reading this? And if any man shall take away the words of the book of this prophecy, God shall take away his part out of the book of life, and out of the holy city, and from the things which are written in this book. Solemn warnings, brethren. Why are we allowing people to fraudulently counterfeit God's original message of Brother Houteff and Sister White? It's just amazing. So, we have this warning. Are you going to follow them blindfolded into perdition and have your name taken out of the book? Well, follow these false teachers and prophets, and that will surely be your fate. So what are we to do about this? Well, this is reality. We have to face this situation. Ever since the death of Brother Houteff, a host of counterfeit symbolic codes have arisen, starting with Florence Houteff, and unfortunately continue on to this day. They're following her pattern, hijacking the codes and using it to introduce heretical teachings. And continues on to the present day. Some of these unauthorized codes do contain important historical information. We're not disregarding that. But they should not be used as an authoritative source of doctrinal teachings on the original Rod message. If you want to know what the Rod teaches, go to the original. Go to the Golden Bowl. Go to the original codes published by Brother Houteff. And that's your only hedge of safety. Get your doctrine, brother, sister, from the Golden Bowl, not anywhere else. So the only safe and sane procedure is to publish and teach only from the original Symbolic Codes, Volume 1, Number 1, to Volume 10, Number 2, published from 1936 to 1954 by V.T. Houteff, him and him alone, Old Mount Carmel Center, Waco, Texas. That's it. No more, no left. That is our hedge of safety, brethren. So let us follow that. So this concludes our presentation. If you have any further comments, questions on this subject, then please subscribe to this YouTube channel or Bright Eon, YouTube alternative that doesn't censor free speech, Universal Publishing Association, for future updates and future videos. And if you'd like to request copies of any of the original Shepherd's Rod tract literature for your own study, or for assistance to establish your own original Shepherd's Rod publishing house so that you can print your own literature and spread it as the leaves of autumn to our beloved brethren throughout Laodicea, then please feel free to contact us anytime. Here's our email, upa5453@gmail.com, or you can phone or text us or WhatsApp connect us at 860-798-3672. We thank you for your time, and may God richly bless your search for truth as for hidden treasure. Godspeed. And I forgot our website, whyparish.org. We have 3, but this is one where you can follow current publishing on these issues amongst Davidians. So take care, God bless, and follow the truth and nothing but the truth in the original Rod. God bless.